Okay, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. That's great. I think we've got quite a few people joined already, so we'll probably kick off at the hour. So thank you so much. Just looking actually at the participants list, we've got quite a few people from different roles and different industries, which is fantastic. We're really hoping we can spark your interest and definitely add some value to your approach to payroll, whatever level of involvement that might be for you. So myself and my colleague Joe from our US firm, who will introduce himself in a minute, we'll just be talking around the 5 misconceptions or just 5 misconceptions of payroll as they were we laid out in the outline for this webinar. And it's not a participatory discussion, but we might try and get some questions at the end if we do have time. But do feel free if you want to pop questions in the chat as we go. We can either pick them up if we do get to questions at the end, or maybe as we go along, if there's anything pertinent, we can pick it up kind of as we go through the points there. So firstly, I think I should call out that I think we knew from the outset that we were possibly giving ourselves maybe a bit of an unusual task by trying to talk about payroll from the perspective of things that payroll isn't. But in fact, I actually think payroll professionals are actually very used to doing just that. No, there is not a payroll button, and no, payroll is not scary or some magic that kind of happens behind the curtain. And one of my goals, if I did have a kind of an overarching goal in my career, explaining that, that it's not scary, it's not magical, it's something that everyone would benefit from being better understood would absolutely be one of them, demystifying that space. And yet, despite this quite contrary nature, I think, of being in this function, one of the things that never ceases to amaze me about payroll is how passionate payroll professionals are. And I think it's probably no coincidence, working in payroll, anyone would tell you that they probably, if they didn't love it, they just wouldn't do it, But I think a lot of businesses, despite that, are missing opportunities, to capitalize on that, on the drive and the passion that they actually have in these departments, really just due to the fact that as a function, it can be misunderstood or maybe misplaced in your organization. So because Joe and I are very invested really in exactly this, those questions, how to answer them, and maybe more importantly, just how to talk about them. That's what we're going to talk and share about this afternoon. So to introduce myself, first off, my name is Miranda Humphries. I'm a director in Grant Thornton in Dublin. I've been working in international payroll for about 15 years. Prior to joining Grant Thornton about 6 years ago, I worked in a number of years delivering international payrolls in different organizations. So currently the work that we do in Grant Thornton, Ireland is delivering global payroll bureau services for clients, along with a good bit of payroll advisory and consultancy projects. And simply put, for myself, I have spent my whole career in payroll. I'm very much the payroll professional, and I'm very passionate about it. I love it, and I love seeing it done well and talking and having discourse about it. So that's me, and I'll push over to Joe to introduce himself.
Well, thanks, Miranda. I appreciate that, and maybe I'll also add to the discussion that it's an interesting challenge we gave ourselves today to talk about it, and maybe even just limit it to 5 areas, because I know when we're talking, when we're working on solutions for our clients, we can go in so many different directions when it comes to payroll, comes to transformation, maybe some of those misconceptions or some of those gray areas that you were hitting on. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'm excited to see where the discussion goes today. So I'm a senior manager in Grant Thornton, US, and I really focus on back office transformation strategy. So that's the intersection of human resources, information technology, and finance. Of course, supply chain, operations, a variety of other areas do come in there. And I'm normally helping organizations through some pretty large, complex, multi-year journeys when we engage in. And what's been most interesting to me, having grown up in HR, then done quite a bit of time in finance, is that when I'm on these journeys, payroll is often that intersection that that maybe the executive team, maybe the controller, the CFO, or other leaders that I'm working with are surprised to realize that payroll's a linchpin to making something happen. When there's a change in HR, a change in the GL, maybe there's some IT things going on, and it all happens to intersect in that one spot. And it's been one of the most interesting epiphanies and maybe even for me, unexpected epiphanies, is just how central it can be. And then I think something you said was important. It's not a black box, and there's not that payroll button. But I also think people outside of payroll don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about payroll. And so it's a bit unknown what happens there. And so one of the things I'm passionate about, and I think I heard you mention this as well, is helping the business and payroll understand each other better, and or at least translate between them so that the needs and demands and those that interconnectivity comes through as part of these discussions. So I'm excited to jump in and have those chats today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So the first point that we had on our outline, and I think it's a really good place to start. It sets the scene a bit on how we see it, and how, I suppose, our starting point for how we describe this, which is the misconception is payroll is an island. Essentially payroll is a standalone function. It operates autonomously. If you have issues in the delivery of your payroll, then the problems and therefore the answers solely, are going to be in that realm, in the control of that function. I know we referenced this in the context of the shared service centers. That's obviously what we see a lot of with our clients, but I think this really applies to payroll in any organization and structure, but very much particularly where you have centralized services. It can have been created in a bit of a silo, and that's where it was put and that's where it sits, and that is a misconception as to how it functions in reality, and it is going to be a block for maturing as a business and developing and delivering well. And essentially this is a concept that Joe describes really well. He has a really nice way of putting it together. So I'm going to pass it over for you to kind of set the scene for us, Joe.
Yeah, so no pressure there. Thanks for that. It's something that I want to make a connection to your introduction, which is, frankly, I think payroll professionals are almost heroic in their drive to make sure payroll is it's run correctly, and it's run on time, because they feel that weight when I talk to my colleagues in those roles. They feel the weight and the responsibility of making sure that people's livelihoods are secured, and that the compensation they're deserved is paid timely and accurately. And so what that means is they basically accept everything that's given to them and they figure it out. They'll put shadow processes in place. Frankly, everyone has their 10 key and their tape where they're double checking things, and that works. But given the global disruption we've had, the acceleration in business, the consolidation we're seeing, the massive growth, it works when things are stable, but it breaks down much more quickly when the situation starts changing in the manner that we've all been experiencing the last couple of years. And so when I talked about that epiphany about payroll being that touch point where everyone gets together, it's really a team sport, so to speak, where if you think about it, decisions that are made in the recruiting process and onboarding, all the way through an employee putting in their demographic information and their tax and regulatory information from the governments that you pay for, that have to be computed and calculated, vendors, the financial reporting aspects, all of those elements, and I'm overly simplifying here, have to work together in order to produce a payroll. When, I think the common perception is, oh, well, we just told them a rate of pay and the check's going to go out. And so it's that true team collaboration that just happens rather than is something we're conscious about, that I find very interesting. And once you start having that awareness and those discussions start happening, we find the value and the efficiency and that scalability, I think we're going to talk about in a little bit, really starts to become front and center, and payroll starts to be a bit more involved. I'll tell a quick story, and feel free to cut me off if I go on a bit too long. But I can think about a client that we worked on where payroll was actually essential to the mergers and acquisitions process. And the company had a significant book of business. This was several years ago. And what was happening is that the transaction agreements were actually at risk because payroll could not either divest of the folks that were leaving or onboard the new acquisitions within the contractual terms. And so the deal team, the value thesis, et cetera, of multi-million-dollar transactions, everything else had been worked out, and it was literally hinging on can we get this through payroll in time? Can we convert them in, or can we move them out? And that was shocking to everyone involved, not necessarily to the payroll folks, but that was one of those things where all of those moving pieces, and it's that one last spot that can have a significant and material impact to a part of the business no one would ever think about.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people would be familiar with that scenario, probably more in the context of let's say a near miss. And I think this comes back to what you're saying about, payroll professionals, they'll get it over the line. If there's a way of doing it, they'll do it. But I think a lot of people would say, oh yeah, that nearly didn't go through because when it got to payroll, we realized that, that the setup time was longer than we thought, or, there was a complexity we hadn't considered. And most of the time you find a way of getting it done, you find a way of pushing it over. But yes, a lot of things, and look, anyone working in global payroll, this is going to be a conversation that everyone is familiar with. We need to set up a payroll in Germany. When do you need it? Last week.
Right.
It's just that's just how things happen. The business moves fast, and if you have to make a business decision, you make it, you get things done, and then payroll is quite often a little bit far down the line learning that information. And again, there are ways of pulling it together. It can be done, but if you brought it the other way around, brought them into discussion, brought them up to the table, made all of that more a part of your process. At every level, and I think it's very much at the small operational level as well, where you see a lot of these niggles come about just through that lack of understanding just between teams. And I think this is the kind of thing I would have seen a lot of, and seen the frustrations coming about, is when, let's say, your HR department doesn't understand some of the needs of your payroll department. And I think a really good example, again, something that people probably recognize is, you have a great HR system, you have a great payroll system, maybe they even talk to each other really, really well, fantastic. But let's say your HR professional has to load a new hire onto that system. They need to understand everything about everything, but they have a really good understanding of how that hits payroll. And one of the classic examples is the placeholder. I had to put that person on the system. The system wouldn't let me put them on without an national insurance number or without a date of birth. I didn't have it, but I had to get them on the system, so I put in a placeholder. And then maybe because they don't know a deadline's coming up, or maybe because it gets forgotten in the system or something, that placeholder hits the system, hits the payroll, and goes through. And that's just a small example, but it is that kind of thing of, that is not resolved by saying, your HR department is missing a trick, or your payroll department. It's just getting people to talk together and communicate and understand more about that whole piece. And I think it's, again, I suppose, so my background is kind of HR into payroll as opposed to finance into payroll, which is, the kind of the two classic routes. So a lot of my examples come from there. But one of the things I used to see very often is that kind of scenario. The HR department has worked really hard on something, like you say, a merger and acquisition, or an employee relations issue. They've worked really hard on it. It's been very complex. They've done everything right. They've fixed it. They've resolved it. They forgot to tell payroll. And, telling payroll was step 201 of 200 very complicated things that they achieved. But because it didn't hit the line at the end, it's now, become more complicated and difficult. And if you just work as a business to create that understanding, to not separate payroll from HR, also not separate payroll from finance, it doesn't have to sit with one or the other. If you can, create the synergies across both departments and just the understanding on the ground level and from the top down, there's so much benefit to be had to the business. And I think the first place you'll see it is in your everyday delivery of payroll. And then I think as you build and as you, mature as a business, you'll then start to see it at the strategic level.
There's two things I want to hit there that really resonated with me as you were talking about it, and I'll make a connection. There's not many businesses that don't ask all the support functions to be more efficient, and can we reduce some costs somehow? Can we do more automation? Why do we need the staff that we have? And there's also no payroll team that I've ever met that's overstaffed. In fact, most of them are fraying, and that's true for finance, HR, and in general across the board. But one of the challenges is it is run pretty efficiently, and so when I come at it from that transformation perspective, there's usually an effort. So say a finance person asks me to come in and look at that. There's usually a return they're hoping for, and in payroll we look across that in a couple of ways. Obviously, there's financial. Are there things that you can do? There certainly are. Maybe there are costs associated with it. We talk multinational payroll. There's certainly currency conversion challenges that you may have as you're moving money back and forth. We can work with Treasury on, especially if there's large stock or equity compensation that happens. That's definitely a huge cost area for clients. There's the regulatory compliance and penalties. So there are some hard dollar savings, but there's these hidden costs. So you gave the example of someone using placeholder data. I have, and actually at more than one client, have found something very interesting in recruiting that ties into how an employee is classified, not exempt versus non-exempt, but how they're classified for the purposes of fringe. So benefits, the types of other compensation that they're eligible for. And folks have thought long and hard, and they've automated that payroll process, that accrual process, to take that fringe information from the employee classification and then roll it through. And what we're finding, especially in situations where companies are doing tons of hiring, is exactly what you said, is that recruiter simply, or that HR person is simply trying to do their job, get the folks onboarded in a timely manner, and they don't understand the decision they make and then the consequences that go downstream. And so I think about a client that could bring on hundreds of employees in one batch. The person onboarding them makes that selection. It's wrong. But the way that the human capital system works, someone in shared services now has to go into every single employee individually, back out that transaction. And oh, by the way, if any other transactions have happened on top of it, they have to back out those manually first, write them down, go correct the misclassification if they find it in time, and then put in those changes on top of it, all so that something can then process correctly. Okay, sure, errors happen, we make that change, but I find teams of people that's their primary job function. Instead of fixing that breakpoint in the very beginning and doing that education, we literally employ tens or dozens of people to go back in and correct it. And it's because of that lack of collaboration that you called out. But there's real value. Those folks can be redeployed to more insightful roles, or there's cost savings to reallocate those positions elsewhere. And then on top of it, employees get paid right the first time, their fringe is right the first time, all of those miraculous things. And it's the lack of communication. And so one of the big wins when we go in and having these conversations is creating that cross-functional governance. And it's not simply one person from HR, it's someone from compensation, someone from recruiting, it's someone from, and in fact, I'd love for you to talk about this. I'm not an accountant, I'm not a tax person, that I don't advise on those things. We have a great team in each of our countries that focus on that. We bring them in all the time, but I know we're seeing more and more connection with accounting, with tax in that payroll space. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's more your wheelhouse.
Yes, and thank you. And actually, I think we kind of called this out with a title further down, which was this kind of, again, this misconception, which is, payroll and accounting are chalk and cheese, and that's kind of a nice way to bring that in, because that's, again, one of those issues is where the whole mindset is payroll is one discipline and accounting is completely another one, and that I think is driven, and I'm going to call it out, by people like me. I came from HR into payroll. I have learned absolutely enough about how payroll affects finance to work within my area, but I go very, very little over the boundary into accounting, and I don't understand a lot of the language. I don't understand how the function operates at a high and a detailed level. And one of the sort of gratifying experiences for me working with accountants is that they feel the same way about payroll. So don't feel too out of place. But I think there is that thing that they are very different. And I've seen a lot of organizations where you have this kind of understanding, which is payroll don't understand accounting, our payroll professional, our payroll team don't understand accounting, and our accounting team don't understand payroll, but they both get that and they work really well together to solve that. And that's great. That is absolutely what you want to see. And that's exactly kind of what we're talking about and driving at. But what we're seeing more of, which is really interesting and I think fantastic to see, is organizations saying, okay, take it a step further. Let's employ someone who does understand payroll and who does understand accounting. That is possible, and it's a great thing for businesses to take up, and it's something we've been facilitating a few clients with recently, actually, from our own team, from professionals trained within our team who have a lot of crossover because we have those functions existing together, and we do a lot of work across together. We're actually placing individuals from our team into our clients to help in the payroll accounting role. So they go in, they're able to understand, they would actually do some of the running of the payrolls. So they have that kind of hands-on experience of not just payroll generally, but payroll for that business, what it means, how it's run, how it's made. And then they step into the accounting role to handle the liabilities, understand what's being booked, handle the queries, have the R2R team being able to actually understand what's going on the other side of the house. So as a payroll team, most people would know you get a lot of queries from the accounting team, and they can take up a lot of your time because they take you out of your expertise in your space. And you can describe everything. They come to you about what does this pay element mean? I can tell you a lot about that pay element. I can tell you all about how to tax it. I can tell you all about the people who are eligible for it. I can tell you exactly what it looks like on a payslip, but I don't know what the cost center is, or the the reporting. It's just taking them outside of that expertise. But if you carve a role, train someone in exactly that, it can create incredible efficiencies. And that's just the beginning. It's the efficiency is lovely, but actually you're creating a huge bridge in those teams, and you're probably going over time to see a huge amount of value just from building up processes around that bridge itself. So for us, that's a really nice sort of evolution that we're seeing, and I think for us it's nice, especially because we work so closely together. I get so much value from our accounting team, and hopefully that's about me.
Where I would connect the dots on that, and what's resonating to me is I was actually having a conversation with a head of corporate strategy at a large multinational manufacturer, and they were expressing a lot of frustration with payroll and the payroll technology, that they're not able to get labor cost that they can then tie to production, so that they can understand profitability and efficiency, and if the initiatives that they're putting in place are moving forward. And it has a lot to do not only with how they had configured a very good piece of, they have one of the leading technologies there, so it's not a system limitation, but it was, I think, two of the things, one that we haven't talked about, which we will in a little bit, which is maybe how the technology works, et cetera. But the other was, I think it is that for gap between accounting and payroll, and how they're doing that reconciliation. Frankly, they're just taking one lump sum for salary. They're not tying it down to individuals, production, et cetera. And it created a lot of frustration all the way over in strategy, not even in the accounting side of the house because of that breakdown. And what I've seen is, so you have that complete gap where nothing's getting reconciled, or something else you said resonated, which is accounting takes up a lot of my time, or from the accountants, geez, I spend hours and hours and hours with folks from payroll. to make it right and to help understand and figure out all these problems, it's really frustrating. It sort of gets lost that accounting is employing one or more people to do nothing but talk to payroll, who's employing one or more people who spend a ton of time just trying to figure it out. And when I look at organizations that have evolved beyond that, it's resonating to me in a couple of places, but we'll use this example where, maybe it's the payroll leader. Often payroll falls under finance. In fact, most of my clients, it falls under finance, but they're still separate groups, or they're shared service or however. But there is that payroll accountant where that is their job, and they're the one person who's doing both, or a couple of people, depending on the size, and you're getting that efficiency to take care of it. Obviously, very high level, 3 examples, but I definitely see that journey at clients.
And I think, and I think, as I said at the beginning, and looking at our list of people, we've got a lot of different people who are at different levels of their career, at different levels of involvement with payroll. And I would have said, like, if I were to go back and start my career again, I would find this really interesting from the perspective, excuse me, of, don't just, yes, payroll, you want payroll to be your career. That's great, but that doesn't mean only learn about payroll. That doesn't mean you have to pour yourself into this niche. You will add huge benefit to the businesses you work in, to your own valuable, skills as you work through your career by, maybe formally training in those areas, but also just, you have spare time, go spend it with the HR team, talk to them about what they do, understand what they do, go to the finance team, understand what they do. And, when you get those niggles, when you get the finance team constantly asking you the same question, time and time again, it's say, okay, well, I don't get something, or you don't get something, but we need to go back to the beginning, not just keep fixing this issue, or, so on. And I think it would definitely change probably the way that I came through my career in kind of branching out earlier into building those skills and understanding in those areas.
Mm-hmm. And it might disrupt our agenda, so feel free to redirect me a little bit. But one of the things I'm struck by when people are talking about payroll these days is it's more innovation and aspirational. So it's in leveraging the data and driving value back into the business, and being that center of new innovation, new insights, new profitability, and I do think that exists. But I want to tie it back to getting the fundamentals right first. And I think you made an important distinction. It doesn't mean, though, that you shouldn't have both. The business shouldn't know, the business should know what their decisions, how it impacts payroll. But from a payroll perspective, you're not simply paying people, but you're enabling a portion of a value stream, which is in some degree tied to revenue, or say maybe you're a mission-driven organization, a not-for-profit or governmental. You're then wisely using your monetary funds to support that mission in a way that better enables it. And if you understand those connections and you get the basics done well, coordinated, efficient, it's then going to create that foundation to enable moving to the future. So definitely not intending to take us that direction right now, really focused on the basics and helping folks understand the intersection. But I did want to call out, in my opinion, it's getting the fundamentals right enables all of the the future innovation.
And I think that's a great point. And I think it actually segues really nicely into the next point. So I'm not worried at all, because I think that's actually, and I think the same is true of a few of our points in the agenda, is that I think we have a take on them that is maybe not super obvious, but certainly for this one. Technology. So technology is the answer to everything. That's the misconception. And I think this is something, and I would almost go so far, and Joe, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think at this point, it's almost just become a bugbear for me, maybe for you too, that we're seeing with clients either that they come to us and this is part of the project we work on, or just that we see it incidentally through our work with them, is that buying the new shiny system is seen to be the answer. We're having trouble with payroll, we'll buy a new payroll system, or we've got a best-in-class HRIS system, so if we're still having payroll delivery system problems, then let's upgrade payroll delivery as well. And it's about and again, it's about a few things, but one of them, just tying to what you said, is it's the basics. Get the basics right, and then buy the big shiny system to feed into them. But essentially, coming from that point, if you're having payroll delivery issues, there is so much you need to know about that before you even try and solve the problem. Are they really coming from your payroll department? Are they coming from the feed into your payroll department? Did you just invest in a very shiny HRIS system which you're not using properly? Therefore, attaching it to a very shiny payroll engine is not going to help. And that's just the beginning. And I am seeing this more and more. And I think it's part of an evolution as well with a lot of teams. Maybe as the business grows, you need to grow with it. And yes, technology is a huge part of that. It is key. It's key to your efficiencies, to your accuracy, to having a team with processes that can be grown and relied upon. And with churn and turnover in your team, the technology has to be there to protect the business. But it's about the right technology and the right technology at the right time. And I know it's something you see a lot of, and you would work with very, very directly as well.
We may need another hour just to just to talk about technology. We'll come back to that at some point. So that probably is one of the biggest, what I call trigger events. I'll get a phone call, which is our payroll technology is broken. Okay, really interesting. Tell me about it. Which system are you using? Oh, well, they pay 60% of people in your country, and they tend to get it right on that technology. I don't always go there with that instantly, but I'm curious. Tell me more. We'll understand it. But it really is that orchestration of the people, the process, the policies ahead of time, and so we have the discussions about the technology. And sure, maybe there are some tweaks you can make in the system setup, and maybe your technology does have an issue down the line. But I have never come into a situation where it wasn't the structure that you had in place that was contributing to making it to where the technology couldn't really do its job. And that's almost been exacerbated by the movement to software as a service. Because if you think about payroll I'm going to age myself a little bit. Payroll, a lot of payroll systems people are using now are on legacy mainframe technology, even in the back end. And it was much easier to custom code logic to accommodate something. And sure, the SaaS systems are getting better at it, but the complexity we have as an organization is much harder to translate into these systems that have a menu of options, and they're very flexible, very powerful. However, if you don't harmonize, you don't simplify up front, you're asking technology to do something it's simply no longer built for. The other thing I find that's a huge misconception about payroll is, oh, we're going to change our payroll system, and it's one system. When in reality, you've talked about this, it's the human capital system. And maybe we use a different recruiting platform. So we have the recruiting platform, the HR platform, our tax data is a third product. Maybe we have one or more different ERP systems that we have to tie into. And then, we need to liaise with all of these different benefit vendors that we're using. And so very quickly payroll, and by the way, this is just one country. Very quickly, payroll goes from one system to 6 or 8 systems. And then we can exacerbate that with multinational payroll, which often, even if it's within the same platform, there are different instances of that platform based on the countries, and then it's being consolidated. But it's not, again, just one system in each of those countries. It's that symphony of systems coming together to facilitate that payroll. And so when someone asks, hey, can we make this change? I'm going to give you an example that, frankly, I continue to, I've actually seen this more than one place, and I continue to use, and it almost sounds like hyperbole. We had a project where the company rebranded, and multinationals, 50, 60 countries, all over the globe, and they changed the logo. And the logo had to go on the employee self-service portal for payroll, and it had to go on all the pay stubs. And pay stub compliance can be a really big deal in some countries, and you don't want to break the pay stub. And in the US, it can be a really big deal in certain states. And it's something as simple as changing a logo required thousands of hours and months of work to be done. And it was payroll that was the long pole in that tent to keeping it from being done, because it had to be orchestrated across multiple areas of the payroll system and then magnified across every single country that had its own deployment. And it wasn't as simple as change a logo file on a server somewhere and it cascades through everywhere else. And it was because of the complexity and how that system was allowed to grow organically over time, rather than a strategy, rather than working in coordination. And something as simple as we changed our logo. Still a 1 by 1 inch square. I apologize, I'm not a metrics person, but the amount of complication, the amount of cost, the amount of frustration, and taking the payroll team and those special projects folks away from their day-to-day job to do that, it has been one of the most interesting and almost silly, but at the same time profound things that I've been a part of.
Yeah, and interesting, because and I think it comes back to other examples as well, is like, that was not the point of that exercise. It is not one of the things that is going to get the most value out of that exercise, but it became one of the biggest pieces of that exercise. And that just takes everyone away from what they need to be doing, doesn't it?
Well, we set aside job code harmonization. We set aside a incentive program that was in the pipeline, where there were some tax liabilities for that. I'm seeing someone maybe having a few audio issues, so hopefully we'll be able to help. I can still hear you, Miranda. And so I think, are we good? Miranda, you can hear me as well?
I can hear you fine. I'm not sure.
Great. All right, so we'll keep going. So again, I'm gonna push on that logo issue, but we set aside some very real, impactful programs that were in flight, that would have regulatory benefit to the company, that would have employee experience benefits to companies. And by the way, more than one company had seen this exact same thing, because of that complexity that was put in place. And it's astonishing to the CFO or the finance leaders or the folks in the business that, I just need a logo change. What are these people telling me? Why is it so hard? And again, it's bringing folks together and helping them speak that language. And so if I translate this for the payroll person that's focused on getting the job done, getting people paid, it's about having that space on occasion to look up and to educate and to help folks understand the complexity that you're managing. And sometimes that's difficult, because you've always done that, what I call the heroic effort, to just make it work and take it. Payroll's a downstream function. You just take what's given to you. But at a certain point, with growth, with complexity, et cetera, you simply can't add enough bodies, people, technology to make it better. You have to harmonize and simplify first. And that's something we're coming across more and more.
Yeah. And I think there's so much in that, and I kind of like, I feel like in a way that's a very scary, very big picture, but that is the reality, is that if you allow it to grow organically, if you don't take control of the process, take control of what's being created through need, through misunderstanding, through all these things, that's what happens. And I think that comes back to the technology piece in the, it's, yes, you need the technology. Oh my God, of course you do. Mm-hmm. But it's got to be the one. If you've got 20 different benefits vendors that give you 20 different types of reports, you need to have a way to assimilate all those reports, bring that data into your system, which is not going to be manual, which is not going to need rewriting, every 6 months when a new column gets added or so on. And it's about knowing how to use that. And I think what often happens is, the big shiny piece of payroll software with all the bells and whistles, and it will integrate absolutely. And this is what we see. And I suppose it's a frustration, very much it will integrate perfectly with your HRIS. Everything that goes into your HRIS will flow beautifully, completely seamlessly into your payroll system. So you put your benefits in your HRIS system. Oh no, we don't put those in. Okay, so they'll be done somewhere else. Do you put your bonuses in there? No, the bonuses don't go in there. Okay, so they'll, and it's like, those are two amazing systems, and they do an amazing job of talking to each other. But if you are not using the HRS system, then you've got to bring that through another way. And it's that thing of, stop and look at where you are, the way you actually operate. Because bear in mind, you probably haven't done this because payroll has completely fallen over. Payroll is working. So how is it working? How is it being done now? And, do you want to keep doing it that way? If the answer is yes, then, you know, find the technology to meet that. If the answer is no, we want to completely overhaul it, we want to make the absolute best use of technology, know that you have a journey to go on, you know, right. And it may be a very valuable journey, and, you know, completely support that. You know, you will have teams begging to make that kind of journey. You know, they want to, you know, take that kind of innovation, bring that kind of work into the team, but recognize that you don't just, you know, flip the switch and there you go, you've got the new system and everybody, you know, everything flows through it. There's so many things we can talk about on technology. One of the things though that you commented on is payroll hasn't fallen over yet. By the way, that's a whole lot of fun when payroll does fall over. And it does happen. That's a scenario where, by the way, it's not just the accountants, the regulatory compliance folks, the tech people get involved. Literally, crisis communication teams, standing up call centers to handle the influx. Years of tax work that gets involved in covering penalties for employees, and we can go on and on that one. So one thing that was interesting, I wanted to call out that I did, just an example of I saw. I've seen a couple of companies do something that was a good use of a new technology or newer technology within their existing system. And then I think there's a few more things we want to touch on. Robotics process automation, like RPA. A lot of payroll departments also deal with timekeeping and the timesheets, or at least they need that data. And at least in the States, there may be reasons to produce a year's worth of timesheets for someone or a group of employees. Maybe there's litigation, maybe we're doing a report, our auditors just want to come check it, make sure it's okay. And a lot of clients and a lot of the timesheet systems don't just have this bulk export option. And so what they were finding is they either had to have it all printed out and someone had to go pull the files, or they had someone that was going through, okay, I need Joe's timesheets from this year for these periods, and literally go through, print one to PDF, then print the next one to PDF, et cetera. And I've seen this again multiple places where they have been able to actually pretty efficiently and either asking an outside group to come set it up, or larger organizations have like an RPA, robotics process automation team, where they went in and they've automate that. So now all you do is a spreadsheet, the employee's name or their unique identifier, what are the periods that we need, and then the robot goes in. And so instead of one person spending 8 hours a day doing nothing but saving timesheets to PDFs or printing them out, they fill out a spreadsheet, they hit go, and then the system goes and does it. There's no labor spend on that front. The accuracy is there if you filled out the spreadsheet right. And so that's an example, because I know we talked about all the things you don't want to do. There is innovation you can do that doesn't blow up the whole new system, but drives a pretty smart use of funds and technology. Yeah, I love that example. I love that. I think that's exactly the kind of thing that a lot of people, if they were to look at, like I said, look at where you are now, you might say, well, this system is absolutely no good because we have to download all the manual timesheets. If someone could do that, say, okay, we will give you this, it costs 1/10 of the amount of a new system, and it takes that process away and you know, streamlines it through. And that was actually your biggest problem. You've just sold 90% of payroll, and you don't have to go through a whole, like, you know, thing. I think that's a wonderful example. That's really great. And again, like, I think, you know, coming back to kind of payroll people and passion, like, you know, I would imagine there are people saying, I would love to do that. I would love to learn about robotics. I would love to apply, you know, robotics to my role and things. You know, it's such a great space for learning and developing, you know, our skills anyway. I will bring us through to the next topic, because I think one of the things is we did just want to hit the topics that we outlined. So the next topic, we couldn't think of a snappy title, the misperceptions around data integrity.
Data.
And I think one of the reasons we couldn't is because we talked about it, like, okay, so, you know, what are we going to hone in on? And the fact is, I think there are so many different things, you know, we knew that it had to be part of the agenda, but so many different things we could say about this, like so many places we could go. So we kind of said, okay, we'll each just kind of hit on what we see as just at the top of our mind, you know, maybe because it's a priority to us right now, maybe we've just seen a few, you know, examples recently that really hit it home to us. And, you know, so I'll go first with my current top of my mind. And this really, I think it's partly because it's always been one of my, you know, kind of irritations, and also because we've seen a very significant kind of issue with a client recently. And that is, you know, the misconception around your data integrity, the security of your data, is just having an understanding of how much true ownership and control you have over your payroll data. And I think that goes to a number of different places. One is, and again, a lot of people will be familiar with this, is, you run the payrolls through either a system or a provider, you have a relationship, and then you need some of that data back. You need to report on it. You need to give maybe need to manipulate it and give a report on a particular type of earnings or similar, but you need to download, or you need to give it to an auditor or similar, and you send a bill. Here's the bill for giving your data back to you. And for me, in a few of the organizations I worked, and probably most, payroll is really run to a very tight budget. And when you say, well, that they're trying to charge €200 for that data, you'll be told no. You have to go and try to find another way to scrape it up. And that's just an irritation, And I think the other, this is kind of the extreme end of this scale. And if you'd told me this a month ago, I'd have said that won't happen. But I've just seen it happen. So I suppose this is why it's kind of a top of our mind, is that we've been working with a client recently who wanted. So obviously we run a global payroll bureau. A lot of our work's in transitions. We transition clients into our system, onto our platform. And you need transition data. You need to have that information from the previous provider to set up their taxes, their earnings, all of that employees year-to-date data, absolutely crucial data. And the relationship in this case with the vendor had broken down to the point that they refused to provide data. They refused to run the next payroll and refused to provide any data for them to transition. And I was blown away by that situation. I just would never imagine that could actually happen. And I think, it just goes back to just knowing where your data is and how much control you have over it. The scenario might be different. It might be that you have an auditor breaking a door down for information, and if you don't get it to them, you're going to cause issues. It might be that you have personal pressure from a superior who says, I need that report. The situation doesn't matter. The point is, you have given all your data to this system, this company. Is it there for you when you need it? And it's about, maybe it's just as simple as, are you saving down your reports properly? Is there just an assumption that, you run the payroll and then the data exists somewhere where it's safely held, well, that's fine. It's secure, hopefully it's secure, but is it accessible? Is it there for you when you need it? Can you draw it down? Can you draw it down in a usable way? Will it only be provided to you on a report type that you can't use, that you can't manipulate?
The PDF versus the Excel file, yeah.
Right, will you get a ream of PDFs or even separate document PDFs when you need to do, all of those things. And the thing is, it could just be a bit of grit in your shoe that just irritates you every time you need to do that report, or it could genuinely turn into a huge issue for, anyone who's ever done a transition knows that, you lose sleep over the integrity of a decimal point coming across in those payrolls. It's so important. It can be done. It's just going to be very, very, very hard and very, very, very stressful. So do yourself a favor and just, go back and say, well, okay, if I lost my system tomorrow, if I lost access to that vendor tomorrow, do I have the data? Do I have the records? Is it there? So that's my current take on data integrity.
So and I don't think you and I've talked about this. So but it does inspire some thoughts, and I want to actually bring it back even to that accounting conversation and the interplay across the back office. So what I've seen in larger, more complex, especially multinational scenarios with a high employee count, so you're 30,000 to 150, 200,000 or even more, is that those payroll departments or the shared service teams with the payroll will actually have procurement category managers on the payroll team. They won't be, maybe they have a dotted line to procurement, but they're not on procurement, or you collaborate very closely with procurement. But I see them actually, especially when you have a different vendor in every country, very complex, and you're measuring performance, you're driving those standards. They've been burned before. And so what they end up burned, they've had a problem happen and they've learned from it. They're actually employing those category managers on the payroll team. And it's their job, especially if they're outsourcing, not just technology, but they're actually outsourcing some of the processing to ensure that performance, but then also to ensure those terms are there. Because one of the things I come into often is, Oh, well, we've had this payroll system for a decade. The contract expired 4 years ago. We're just on the year-to-year turnover. There's no performance measures. The penalty's not there. And then to your point, we're going to go with the new shiny system, and there's no pre-negotiated terms for that divorce agreement. What happens when we no longer like each other? And to your point, they can get into some very sticky situations, and then maybe your fallback's that PDF for thousands of people, and you're going to have to do a mid-year conversion of all that data, and it becomes a major affair. And I'm sure I'm giving some stress or high blood pressure to some of the payroll folks on the phone who've lived through that. So I apologize, but that's one of the interesting things I've seen. And you and I really aren't talking about data integrity from like they got hacked, there was a privacy violation. We're literally talking about just the fundamental, can you get your data when you need it because of something else that's happening? There was a different point I wanted to make, though, that I wanted to tie in. I am fully supportive and almost evangelize the use of middleware to facilitate the transfer of payroll data. A, for privacy reasons. And then B, it simplifies things. You don't have to do these multiple complex interfaces out of the great software as a service systems into legacy mainframes. They're really hard to tie together. They break a lot of times. So you just do data feeds to middleware, and then that middleware takes care of pushing it out everywhere. I have a client that have been working with where more than 1,000 files flow through their middleware engine. And it's great, right? We invested this time and money, the client invested time and money into putting it together. It's efficient. Everyone knows where they can get their data. But they were still spending a lot of time doing things. And when we came in and did some analysis on efficiency, 60% of those files required a human to touch them, to move it through the process with that middleware engine. And not simply, okay, take it, download it, move it down, but in a lot of cases, take it and then manipulate it.
Yeah.
To move it forward. So multiple data integrity issues. And I'm sure my controls folks, my internal auditors, anytime you have a human touching financial data that then pays to someone in an automated environment where maybe we don't know that they have to do it, creates massive data integrity risk. There might be some privacy compliance issues that we have because that file has to be downloaded and it's now on another system that's not tracked. Again, I could go on. Just wanted to call out that best intentions sometimes don't have that design all the way through. What are all the implications?
Yeah. And you know what? It is that piece again about best intentions. Like, everybody wants to solve a problem, especially if they say, oh yeah, that's in my control. All I have to do is delete the first 2 lines and then re-upload it. Like, I'm not changing any columns. I'm not doing it, but that is the system that one day will fall down and you didn't even know it was there. So yeah,
or Joe goes on vacation, Miranda goes on vacation, and no one's there to move the columns because the system won't accept it if the order's wrong. And then payroll doesn't go through. Yeah. It's happened. Yeah.
I think that's the kind of thing that happens all the time. And that's exactly it. It's like, and we will move on to the last point, but I just think this is really cool, because I think that is the thing, is so much is being created with the best intentions by people who are doing incredibly hard work, who deliver amazing work. But it won't always be that person in that seat doing that job. You have to try and drive a process that they can write down on a piece of paper, and the next person can come in and do. Like, as much as we would love to hold on to all our amazing team members, it's just not realistic. It's it has to be, there has to be that protection, that kind of bolts and braces around it. So I'm going to wrap up with our last point, and we've left ourselves a bit short, but we've probably covered a lot of it anyway, because I feel like this was a bit of a wrap-up piece, and I might even just, we'll hit on your take on this, because I think I said this is a space where I've kind of poached a lot from your vocabulary, but kind of to set it up, I think the people joining this call, I think you've probably already taken enough of a strategic view of your payroll if you're joining this call at all, because you get that, you've given it that place in the hierarchy. It's not just an overhead, it's not just a cost. You want to give it a more strategic place in your business. But what's the next step? How do you decide where to invest, how to invest? Or if you're the person in the payroll team, you maybe, I know where we need to invest in this team, but how do I articulate that? How do I send that message up to the business, and how I want them to influence investment? And I'll let you give your piece on this, Joe, because I love the way you explain it.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, a couple of things are coming to mind just based on the conversation we've been having. I think a win for me, if people take away from this conversation, would be for what I would call payroll stakeholders, the folks outside of payroll that either provide data or are dependent upon payroll to perform, and the payroll teams. If you come together to have a conversation around, simply to have that conversation around what's working, what's not working well. And it isn't payroll you have to accommodate at all costs, which, by the way, is the mentality in most organizations I go into. There's a win. It's realizing, and I use this maybe even a little too much, it's this cross-functional governance that is necessary to bring the teams together to realize what's going on. And a couple of things that I've found pretty insightful from some clients is when you take some trends from other areas of the business. So take what I would call a product management approach, where you have a product owner, maybe that's the functional stakeholder that's there helping then orchestrate and drive those requirements, and it brings all the different parties to the table. So it's not IT or information technology, it's not the shared service team saying this is how it's done. It's that group that's dependent upon it, setting the standards, working with each other, and then moving through and overcoming those obstacles together. That drives a very important win. And it's about looking and making sure you're investing to have the right people in the right places, and that you're using those talents. So again, I started this conversation, which at some point, which may have been a little even weird for some folks. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a tax person. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a payroll specialist. I'm here to orchestrate that group that comes together, that then works cross-functionally to deliver that accurate, efficient payroll that scales, that then impacts so many areas of the business. And then, of course, is mission critical, must get right every time, should be within, less than 0.5 of 1% accuracy at all times, all of the stats that everyone knows.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial to build that understanding. And I think when you're looking specifically at the function, at, let's say, one of these projects, how, what are we, it's the new system, the new provider, the new evolution of the team. It's that piece of, a return on investment model or approach doesn't have a place. No, it does have a place. It can't be the only factor that you're taking in here, and it does discount the bigger picture.
It goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, where there's three different ways to look at return on investment in payroll. And at the risk of seeming impertinent, there's often that interest in looking at the shiny or attractive return on investment, which is typically dollars. It's typically hard dollars in the moment, when in reality in payroll, and you can see I'm animated about this and I get passionate about it. It's the money not spent. It's the risk avoidance and those dollars that are saved because you're not having those financial penalties. It's the payroll leader not getting the phone call that their country leader has the authorities at their office. They're trying to put a chain around the door to shut them down because the tax payment didn't go through that month. That happens. It's how you manage the dollars not spent by making sure the efficiency is there, that you've tackled these challenges, that the breaks aren't going to exist, that drives the biggest return. And when you're able to bring everyone to the table, create a level of trust, and then take what we think is happening and actually show what's really happening, that's usually when there's an epiphany from the folks that hold the dollars or the money, that okay, we're going to invest in this, not because I'm going to get $1 million in hard currency back, but because I'm not going to spend $5 million in penalties down the line, or I'm not going to be unable to pay my people, and we're going to have more resignations and turnover, et cetera. So I appreciate you calling that out just one last time, that sure, there can be dollar savings. Maybe you have an expensive system and you can renegotiate a contract, but the real value is in the risk avoidance.
Yeah. And I think it's, yeah, no, when you, it's the, you're paying for being able to sleep at night, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly we can go on, but I think we are at time.
We could go on and on, but look, we'll do it again.
Well,
Okay. So yeah, we didn't get to questions, and I don't know if any popped up, but you know, if anybody did put anything in the box there, we could certainly follow up with them separately, or they could get in touch with us. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
all right. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you.